being Rebecca's first time. Yay! How are you?
I'm well. I love this live. I just want to hang out with you.
Oh,
I got my
please do.
I got
And
my coffee cup.
if you all do not, please follow Rebecca Larsen.
Oh, that's
She's very
that's so kind.
insightful. She's an educator. And when I say educate, I mean she educates. It's not even just, I know you're a math guru, but I'm not even that. But your intention is to make sure that you are preparing people with the information that they need. It is
Oh,
not
that's so
bites.
kind of you to say.
I know it is, really. I mean, that was one of the reasons when I saw your content, I was like, see, I vibes with her. I can vibes with her. But
Well, I have loved you for a long time. Please continue. Sorry to interrupt. Please
no,
continue.
no, I'm frustrated in the sense of, and I love your feedback. I'm frustrated in the sense of, and I'm sure you know how this feels. You see it. You see it.
Right.
And so many people don't.
Right. Well, I think so many people are trained not to see it. We are conditioned to be so mentally and emotionally weak that we actually cannot bear the truth. So we just have to avoid it. I mean, speaking from like the, conditioned, nice Christian white girl, like to see it is so heavy and painful that we just go, oh, I'm sure it's fine.
But we got to start somewhere. How do we start?
Ooh.
I mean, and let me say this
What a great
much, because
question.
I edit myself most of the time on this app, not because of I not wanting to speak for what I believe, but because there's content violations, and you understand that.
Yeah.
I recognize that my approach to the change that needs to be done would be radically unpopular. It would take a tremendous amount of sacrifice.
Hmm.
And while I myself do not believe in violence, especially if it's just violence for violence sake,
Right.
I'm not a pacifist. And I recognize that unfortunately, there are certain measures that would be taken by people who do not want to see overall growth. They don't want to see unity. They don't want to see development. And those
Right.
people will be violent. So, what I've discovered from people, whether they cross the aisles or if there's someone who is what people call leftists or whatever, it
Hmm.
doesn't matter. You got ends of the spectrum. And you cannot fight nonviolence with violence. That stuff used to work, it doesn't work anymore.
Right.
So while I said we're not all supposed to be walking around just ready to start the war, because that's not what I'm saying, but if you are trying to protect your future, if you are trying to develop a future, there are certain steps that you're going to have to take.
Well, and there are
And
only so many cheeks you can turn. This expectation that, I feel like whiteness just perverts everything. They're like, you should be judging people by the content of their character, but they mean white people. Like they'll take one out of context snippet and say like, I deserve to be judged on the content of my character. And then also saying things like, well, violence is not the answer. Well, violence is not the answer when it's not what you want. But if you think violence is not the answer, then what are the police doing in your on your behalf? Like, then why are we bombing people? Then why are we then, like it's very you can only I sometimes feel like the people who are preaching violence is not the answer for you, but also like preparing for a war, like stocking up for a war, but then telling you, like, oh no, you must not fight. You must not fight. But I must be prepared to fight.
right.
Like, that's
No, that's
a
a,
blatant inconsistency.
and that's funny that you say that, because that's that speaking forked, that speaking out of both sides of your mouth type thing. And I
Yeah.
and I'd like to think, I know this is gonna, I don't know, it doesn't matter how it sounds. There's no way that you can be doing that and not recognize some aspect of it.
Oh, 100%.
So my question is, how do we move away from accepting that people are being willfully ignorant, or they're just ignorant to the information? How do you separate the two? Is there a way to separate the two?
Yeah, that's like saying,
without
how do
taking
we,
drastic measures. Without taking
right,
drastic.
like how do you pull somebody out of a cult? Mm.
I mean,
How do
you
you pull
can't.
somebody out of a cult that isn't ready to leave? I don't know. I don't know. That really is the $64,000 question. Like it really
You know,
is.
I'm glad you said that because my sister loves these cult like research and things. It does, and you know, you're right, Chief Sosa. It does. It takes a lot of emotional, intelligent work, but the number one
Hmm.
piece of work that it takes is will. And if
Yeah.
someone's will is driven toward a cause that they put so much of their effort and desires into, their
Hmm.
will always, I'm not gonna say always, the will for them to do more will only happen if something triggers them to make the change.
Yeah.
And if there's
Yeah.
nothing there to trigger them because the dissonance is so great, then
Right.
they're not, how do you get them? I mean, you technically cannot get someone out of a cult. Even if you grab someone and you were like, we've got them all, and you put them in a corner and said, here's some food, here's some new housing, here's your new life, that cult did not leave them. You just
That's right.
removed them from their location. You removed them from the direct influence, but you
Yeah.
did not take them away from the very ideological views that entrap them physically, emotionally,
Yeah.
spiritually. And in those things, you can't just like you can't, there's no switch.
Right. Yeah, you
So
really, I think that the more I study whiteness, the more I realize I know nothing about whiteness. You know what I mean? Like the further I go into it, I'm like, oh shit, I don't know anything about this. But the more I'm like, okay, like I'm starting to frame it like it's a delusion, it's a shared delusion. And the second you start to step away from it, you realize, like, holy shit, if this isn't true, what else about my very identity is not true? And therefore needs to be completely deconstructed. So I feel like a lot of the like nice white ladies like me are, like we're in kind of like a, how white people never last longer than like 6 weeks. I think it's because in order to really do any sort of like real deconstruction, you kind of have to like rip out the foundation and re-pour. And like a foundation of like it's like an intentional identity crisis. And I don't know how to say like, hey, look, you should take a year or three and deconstruct your entire, like concept of reality and the rules by which we engage. I mean, like I can say it's, like I'm on that path and it's like worth it for me, but it is very much an intentional identity crisis. And I don't, it's, it's
so
such an important question.
I want to ask you a question as a white woman, as a person who's willing to learn, as a person who's willing um to take the steps to kind of make yourself know more and do more. And I recognize that you're not going to have all the answers, that you have work to do,
But I'm going to assume
but
I do. That's another part of
well,
whiteness.
no, but what do you, when you think about your journey in trying to learn,
Hmm.
what do you find the hardest to swallow?
The
Because
grief.
even though your intentions, even though your road is paved with good intentions, you are still a
Hmm.
white woman in America. You were still
Hmm.
socialized as a white woman in America. So what's the hardest thing about deconstructing with that intentional, personal crisis? What's the hardest part for you?
Uh, oh, that's such a good question. Thank you for asking that. For me right now, like I'm reading the 1619 project right now. And
Mm-hmm.
during chapter 2, I had to call my processing partner and just unleash like an hour long like scream sob of just grief because our history is so heavy, and I intellectually know that that heaviness is mine to bear. It is it's not your legacy, that's my legacy. Like we've been shoving it off of ourselves for so long, but it's our legacy to bear, like we're the ones who inherited that debt, that insane moral debt.
Mm-hmm.
And so the grief of it, but also like we don't have any of the emotional musculature to start even begin handling what's ours to handle. Like it's
Right.
almost like we've been intentionally kept weak emotionally, such that when we run into these big feelings of grief, or for me, grief is the big one, or like the shame of it, or the remorse and regret that, like somebody like me, like I didn't really start deconstructing my whiteness until I was in my late 30s. Like, when I think about the harm that I have and continue to cause, I think about that, and I feel incredibly overwhelmed by that. And then lastly, I feel like the loneliness, because even, if I'm honest, like even I have become an unsafe person for my family to talk about things with. Because,
Okay.
like when they say something kind of like racist, I'll go, "Ooh, do you want to have some feedback about that?" And they don't. So like having to find like a totally different community, but also like it's not your community. Like,
Right.
if I thought like, oh, one day I'll know enough and I'll do enough work to be, welcomed into the Black community. That's just not my community. Like if I want one, I'm going to have to build it with other deconstructing white people, which is just a lot of work. And we're not ready to do any work. We're not like we're not used to doing hard stuff emotionally or community wise. Like we're just not used to it. It's just a lot of training.
Well, and this is why I want to ask, because I'm going to ask you this question.
Mm,
If someone came up to you right now and you were trying, let's just say you're in a room, like let's just say this was a real room. So there's 55 people in a room and we're having this
mm-hmm,
conversation, and a Black person says, "Well, I don't trust you. I don't care how woke you say you are. I don't
mm-hmm,
trust you. You're a white woman."
mm-hmm.
How, number one, how does that make you feel? And number two, how do you handle it?
Well, you would know better than me if I'm trustworthy. You know what I mean? I've had, there was a woman who said like, "Oh, I just got a new job and it's with all Black women. How do I let them know I'm safe?" I'm like, they'll know if you're safe before you will. Like that. I don't deserve your trust.
So, as a white woman who's
Mm-hmm,
reconstructing, deconstructing,
mm-hmm,
and reconstructing,
mm-hmm,
when you find your place, when you find your space and time around white people who do not want to deconstruct, who are not willing to enter, and they're not interested in hearing what you have to say,
mm-hmm.
what do you say and how do you feel about that?
Well, I look at it as a well, I try to think about if they were in a cult, how would I be around them? So so for instance, when I talk to my sister who is kind of like on a fence,
Okay.
I will my strategy so far, and really I would love your feedback on this, has been to push back gently. It's a game of inches because I really only do this with the people that I love. But for me, it's a game of inches. I push back as much as I can. And when I feel them getting exhausted, I reassure them that I am a safe place, because I'll say something that will offend her. And
Mm-hmm.
then 3 months later, she'll be like, "You know what? Something that you said has been really bothering me. Like, what did you mean by that?" And then when
Mm-hmm.
she asks, "What did I mean by that?" then we start to have a conversation. But it has been like a years long process of being like a gentle pushback, and then a reassurance that like I love you, and you know what I mean? Like I feel like I'm trying to coax her, but it might be too gentle. I don't know. Like there are some people who don't want to hear it that I just don't, like I don't engage with because I don't know. Like I feel sometimes like I'm too weak in
Too
my
good.
deconstruction to really offer anybody else. Like I'm the sapling. I don't have shade to offer. But if like people who want to know, like I can be like, "Oh yeah, well here's some things that I've learned that you might," and I also I frame it in things like they don't tell us anything. Our education is so whitewashed. Like, are you interested to know? Like, I oftentimes will like ask permission to share things. And I feel like if I say like, hey, are you open to feedback on that? And people will go, yes. But you know, like, I don't know, like I don't know. I don't think I'm good at that yet. I mean, does it
Well, the
stop me
reason
from
I
talking to them?
asked,
But
no, and that's one of I've always enjoyed your direct approach. Well, let me take that back because you're very intellectual. So direct, maybe not for some people, but the way you build up the purpose of what you're saying for those who are willing to listen and willing to learn, then they'll get it.
right.
But and I always tell people this: I'm not everybody's cup of tea. I don't intend on being that. I fit who I fit. The people who understand me, who are willing to learn, who are willing to listen to the content, they'll hear it.
Mm-hmm.
So I recognize that you're not always going to have people who are willing, even without take the content creator away and sit down in front of people. Not everyone's going to want to hear from you. But I have seen in my content, so, I don't know.
I don't know what happened.
I don't know what happened, but I'm glad you got back. So the question I was going to ask is, as a content creator
Mm-hmm.
who talks about things that deal with our relationships, dealing with race and sometimes how political aspects of it, even though my content is not politically driven, I don't care how hard you try, and this is one of the reasons I'm saying this. I don't care how hard you try to separate some of the aspects of our lives. It's hard to do because of the frameworks that we come from. If you're ultra
Mm-hmm.
religious, then certain things are going to matter to you more. If you're not religious, you're agnostic or you're atheist, certain things are going to matter to you more. You're fat, you're thin, you're tall, you're educated, all that stuff's going to change. But I've gone through my content and it amazes me that some of the most vicious comments are white people to white people when white people are discussing the deconstruction, when
Yeah.
white people are offering education on books. So my
Yeah.
question to you as a Black woman who's watching this, because I let it happen. Oh, I don't stop it. No, I let it happen. Go at it. You need to, because that happened to you. This was in your community that created it. So as a Black, because I know it happens, I've seen you respond to certain things. What is it about that you feel creates those types of interactions? Because there's been times I've looked at stuff and I'm like, should I delete that? No, I'm gonna let them have that. Now,
Yeah.
sometimes I'll step in, but most of the time, that's the reason why I have my content the way it is, because most of the time, people are respectful. We need to talk about all the things. So when
Yeah.
that kind of stuff happens, like, where, what's behind that? What
I,
is that?
I I call that the second firewall of white supremacy, where instead of jockeying for position as the best one in the
Mm-hmm.
context of white supremacy, we're jockeying for position as the best woke white. And even though we're becoming slightly aware of the white part of white supremacy culture, we're still incredibly entrenched in the supremacy part of white supremacy culture. And I think we try to cut and paste the tactics that make us good, or like make us look successful, because white supremacy culture is all about where do I rank, who's on top and who's on bottom, who am I better than. In fact, I would say that white supremacy culture, most white people who are enveloped by it have never really met ourselves. Like, because our authenticity box is right next to our empathy box, and you cannot be at the effect of white supremacy without like turning off your empathy, authenticity follows, like it's gone. So all we know is, who am I better than? And I think that when we start to approach, these topics, we we're so much more
Very simple.
interested in
Mm-hmm.
like being the best white girl in the room. I am the A student. I polish the teacher's apples. Like, I know more than you. It's all just the same strategy, but and that's why I think all of the tenets of white supremacy culture kind of like deconstruct at different times and levels. And so the idea of community thinking, or saying like, oh, I have a thought about that, oh, do Do you have a second to hear some feedback about that? Oh, this worked for me, maybe it would work for you, is so alien to white people because we're not used to helping each other. Joy, Schadenfreude counts as joy in white supremacy culture because we don't know what makes us happy. We know what makes us look better compared to our neighbor. So that's,
Mhm.
I think, why you see so many white people coming for their pound of flesh when another white person like makes a misstep. They go, "Oh, she fell. She fell. Did you see her fall? I did not fall. She fell. She fell, and I would never fall like that." And I think that's what that dynamic is.
And I wanted to, Zmar
Fine.
said, young sister, it's not
Morning.
our fight to be in the so-called white people's fight. Now, just for clarification, depending on when you came in, the reason I was making that mention was in my content. So number one, ultimately, if you're on my page, if you're in it, that's my content. That's my home. If you come in
Mm-hmm.
and I let you come in there, then I expect certain things to happen. But
Yeah.
I was asking from the viewpoint of a personal understanding for my depth of knowledge. Because
Oh, I lost your audio. Can you hear me? I can't hear you.
that's my frame of the reason.
Oh,
Can you
okay,
hear
you're
me?
back. Yeah, you're back.
Oh, sorry, my phone rang. Sorry about that. My phone.
Ah,
Um, but that was the reason for me saying it, and I do agree with you. There are, and I've said this before, and some people like it and they don't. There are some spaces where Black people don't need to go. There are some spaces where white people do not need to go. There's some spaces where men don't need to go. Women, people who aren't a part of the LGBTQI plus community. We all need safe spaces in order to deconstruct and reconstruct. I don't
mm-hmm.
expect that there's certain conversations I should ever be sitting on in a white community. I'm not white. And the same goes for Black. People will say,
Yeah.
oh, well, that's not fair. No, it's what needs to be done. There are certain
Mm-hmm.
that's one of the reasons why I created this thing called the cookout session. And I need Black men and women to talk. I don't need white people there. That's not because I'm telling you that's not your business. Right there,
Yeah.
that's the Black community talking to each other. It would be the same way if there was some social issues happening in white communities. My
Yeah.
Black ass doesn't need to be there. You know what I'm saying? And that's not me
Yeah.
saying, oh, well, and the thing that comes in, the problem that comes into that is that, I mean, you said you don't believe in racial communities. Well, the social construct of race exists. Again, like I said in one of my posts, the
I don't
idea
believe
is
in
that
gravity.
I mean, even if you don't believe in something, it does not remove its existence or its effects. So you
Mm-hmm.
can sit there if you don't. Hey, that's up to you. I don't believe in hugging snakes. Don't like them, but the snakes are around and they'll bite you, and there's nothing you can do about it. So the idea isn't that we are all going to be able to have a seat at the table to have a discussion about this big conversation. Some
Mm-hmm.
conversations aren't big. Some
Right.
conversations don't require anyone else's input other than the people that are in that community.
Some of
So
them
that
are
was my main.
in-house. Yeah.
Yes, some they have to be. It's sort of
Yeah.
like I wouldn't expect a man, unless he's there for the purposes of understanding and learning. I wouldn't expect a man to want to sit in a meeting that women are having talking about gynecologic problems. I mean, they could, but that
Mm-hmm.
is a safe space for women talking about gynecologic problems. So,
Yeah.
just like if guys, there's a lot of men, some men that aren't comfortable with talking about having prostate exams or discussing men's health, then those men, regardless of their race, need to be able to sit in a room and talk about that. I
Yeah.
don't need to be there.
Yeah.
That is
I
a
have a
I don't have a prostate. I don't have testicles. That's not my room right now. So and I also think that there's a level of, and I'm gonna be honest with you, sometimes in spaces that are considered open spaces, so if we remove race, since some people don't believe race is in existence, as a Black woman, and if I'm in corporate environments, God forbid if I say certain things, if I say certain things a certain way,
yeah.
I'm being aggressive.
Yeah.
My tactics are I'm splitting people. I'm causing
I am
people.
uncomfortable, which must mean you are intentionally making me uncomfortable. And how dare you?
How dare you? How
Yeah.
dare you? And to be quite honest with you, I don't care because I know and I recognize this. Now, this doesn't matter about where you come from, Black, thin, fat. some people don't know how to articulate their ideas, and sometimes that
Mm-hmm.
is aggressive. That doesn't mean that their ideas shouldn't be valued, but that's just how it is. But on the flip side of that, if you're in a corporate environment, if you're in a business setting, people are talking, things work and they don't work, you should be able to have that conversation. The whole idea is to make sure that you're building up the workforce and making sure that the company grows, whatever. But when you are in those environments and you speak up, and then you're ostracized for speaking up,
Mm-hmm.
but then people thank you for speaking up,
Privately.
but they
Privately.
don't speak up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'll swing by your office later and be like, I'm so glad you said that. Okay, bye. Yeah.
And be in the next meeting like, but then, so I feel like everything that happens has to have some type of benefit without a loss. But I hate to say this, I don't feel like that's possible. I mean, I hate to say that. I genuinely feel like when at certain space, it's almost damn near impossible to create an environment that pushes new construction, that pushes different thoughts and change without someone losing. I don't
Yeah,
know if it's possible.
I think one of the most effective things that like a white person in that conference room can do is to say like, yeah, I want to hear more about that from Silver Fox. Like, what were you saying about? Because I really feel like that's an important idea. Can you continue, like, or say, like, I agree with Silver Fox. I think that's a really good idea, and like not claim your idea for their own, which happens all the time, I'm sure. But to say, like, I don't know if Silver Fox was like done, was done expressing that idea. That's interesting. Like to just show interest, or you like just to like, or if you're not in the room, I'll go like, it's so funny. Somebody was saying, like, why don't you walk up to your boss and be like, why don't we have more people of color in our company? That's weird, right? And when he said that to me, I don't remember who he was, but he said that to me, and I was like, oh, like that feels so dangerous. He goes, that's white supremacy. That feeling of danger that if you say something as a subordinate to somebody who is in power and just go, is it weird that we only have white people working here? Even just that question, that's not even an attack, but for anybody to go like, oh, that feels like I would be like sticking my neck out, you're like, that's white supremacy. That is white supremacy, and it's not from hate. I don't think you hate me, but the fact that you're not willing to go and be like, why isn't this a more welcoming time place? Like why why aren't the black women we hire staying? Like
They don't think
what
about
but we're scared of it. We go, ooh, ooh, but I'm just a cog in the wheel. I can't say anything. I can't do anything. Like I don't have any real power. It's like you do, but you're not willing to exercise. You're not even willing to ask a question. You're not
it.
even willing to ask a question.
That's
And I wasn't. I
interesting.
was terrified.
Yeah, but you recognize it. You might not
Well,
have
now.
recognized it at that moment, but you
Mm-hmm.
recognize it. Some people are never going to get there. My sister is an executive at a tech company, and she's one of, I don't know, maybe less than 10 black people there. So you can imagine what
Mm-hmm.
that feels like. But she was talking to me in a framework because she does diversity inclusion and stuff like that.
Oh, of
And
course you
she
do.
mentioned this term. She mentioned this term. She said she's good as hell at it too. I'll give it to her.
Mm-hmm.
She mentioned this term to me that I hadn't heard, and I read up on a little bit. But she calls it the glass cliff. I don't know if you're familiar with it.
No.
So you know how people say women hit their head on the glass ceiling? Well,
Mm-hmm.
the glass cliff is the cliff to which women of color get pushed toward in environments where it's predominantly white or they're larger scale companies that need people of color, usually women of color, not just black women, but women of color. It's just that disproportionately black women are affected by it based on the
Mm-hmm.
fact that in these higher positions of power, a lot of black women now, since we pass parity with other groups, we are now the most educated people in the United States, highest education level. And
Mm-hmm.
so what happens is they hire this woman based on her degree and her background and her expertise, and they know that their company is a shit show. And they put her on the very tip of the glass edge to bring everything back in. She's spearheading the change, to make these things happen. And the reason they call it the
And then
glass
not
cliff,
listening to her.
and then not listening, or putting that person in a position to where the changes that need to be made are the things that they knew needed to be made, but in their whiteness or in their male privilege, they decided, because remember, I need you to notice, a black man is still a black man, but he's a man.
Mm-hmm.
So while I can expect and understand him as a black woman because of our blackness, he's still a black man. He's still a man. He still got testicles. I don't. You know what I'm saying? So it's just like, I mean, but, and when you, so I don't, and I'm speaking for cisgender. I'm not saying anyone else, but I mention that because of the fact that when you get pushed to that edge, remember what I said? This is the reason why I mentioned it. Oh, that was kind of harsh. Well, you've pushed her to the edge in her professionalism, in a position where you knew you wanted her to do exactly what she's doing.
Yeah, you
And now
came in,
she leaves.
we hired you to come in and crack skulls and reorganize. But the second that you do that, did you have to say it that way?
Come in, can you come on, let's have a conversation real quick. You know, I think there was a little bit of a harshness. So now you're tone policing.
Yeah,
So
Rebecca
you
feels a little bit, Rebecca doesn't feel right about how that meeting went. Do you think you could spend the next 3 hours of your day that you were planning on doing some work and just like make sure that she knows that you're friends and that you like her?
exactly. Do you know how many times I have had that? Do you know how many times I've left positions because of that? And I'm not even executive level glass cliff type of person. I mean, you can still look at the glass cliff on different cliff levels. I would say that. But, you know,
Mm-hmm.
she was speaking of it from, you know, from the top, from, you know, like
Yeah.
higher man, executive level. And when you think about that, if you remove that, it is right here in front of us every day, every
I am
neighborhood.
I'm
Go
not
ahead.
an executive. I'm a math tutor.
She's a smart kid. She's a smart lady. But it happens to us every day. I mean, I think about Fannie Lou Hamer and how she was able to impact a lot of what happened in the civil rights movement in preparation for some of the, you know, later parts of civil rights, and how that woman was not highly educated, but she was one of the smartest women in the movement.
Mm-hmm.
And she carried that weight, but she was also villainized. And part of her
Mm-hmm.
being villainized wasn't just because she spoke up, it was because, well, how dare she speak up, because
Will you
she
say
shouldn't be able
will you
to.
say her name again?
Fannie Lou Hamer.
Fannie Lou Hamer?
Fannie Lou Hamer was a pistol, and I tell you, if that woman didn't make some changes, it we needed voices like hers. We don't need everybody in a stuffy suit that went to a
Mm-hmm.
historically black college or went to
Mm-hmm.
Harvard or was a success story that came from a community college that went to a regular school that then got their master's or PhD. Not every voice that comes wrapped up in a suit and a tie and a pretty bow. I mean, we've
Mm-hmm.
already seen that America is a country in a Gucci belt that lives in a trailer park. I mean,
Right.
it's just, you know, you cannot make the assumption that everything that needs to be done that's going to be beneficial for people in this country looks like a Gucci suit. It
Right.
doesn't. And people are waiting for that. And that's why I feel like the glass cliff is other places. It's in your community arts center. It's in your schools. It's in your neighborhoods. It's even in your home. There's always, think
Mm-hmm.
about it when you hear about kids who, I don't know how many siblings you have, but I think of some of my friends who had like a whole bunch of
Yeah,
cousins, and
I'm the youngest of five.
so there was always that one sibling that would be like, I wasn't me. And they sit down, and then the other one's like, I did it. And then it's like, well, it's kind of the same. That's why I said it's scalable. It's not always just on a corporate level scalable.
Yeah.
But then the person who speaks up for the things is the one that gets kind of, you know, like finger wagged, or in this case, fired, or in this case, ostracized, or in the case of history, disappear. You know, I mean, a lot of change has come. That's why I said earlier, before, when I started all of that part of the conversation, I have a hard time believing that you can incite a certain level of change that benefits without loss.